1 billion years in the net. Innerface. Bright light hit his eyes. The man squeezed them shut, turning his head away from the dazzling yellow glare. And at the sight of the green plastic, the first real thought flashed in his mind. He looked around in confusion, trying to avoid the lantern aimed directly at his face. The hospital room was small, with low ceilings and ascetic furnishings. Its walls were almost entirely hidden behind cabinets, computer consoles, and screens. A mirror hung nearby, but from that angle, the man could not make out his reflection. The massive metal bed he lay on stood almost in the very center of the cramped room. To the right, a nightstand with a desk lamp was visible, and a little further away, a man in a strict black suit sat on a stool, fingers laced, watching the patient expectantly. "You have regained consciousness after all?" he asked with concern. "Can you speak? Do you remember anything about what happened? About yourself?" Thoughts shifted heavily and reluctantly. Each one had to be dragged out of a black abyss, straining every mental faculty. The man opened his mouth, remained silent for a moment, clenched his teeth, and tried to concentrate. His mind cleared, but it still felt like a boulder, almost incapable of thinking.
"No, I don't remember anything,"
he finally said, remembering how to use speech.
"Where am I?"
"How unfortunate," the man in black drawled. "Then lean on my words and look for the corresponding memories through them, all right?"
"All right, shoot,"
the patient muttered, half closing his eyes and turning away from the light as much as possible. The interlocutor nodded, and glancing out of the corner of his eye at the monitor turned toward him, began his story. This morning, a band of terrorists broke into the directorate and started a shootout. Many guards were killed. Condolences have already been sent to their families. That was when you were wounded. Fortunately, not fatally. Can you remember that? The patient leaned back powerlessly against the hard pillow and strained his memory. Random explosions, screams, the crackle of discharges. He nodded in silence. "Wonderful. Then let us continue." The attacker's target was the main control consoles of Golem City, our city, which is built on the body of an ancient robot. They wanted to bring this robot to Ardania and stop the war going on there, thereby violating the isolation treaty. He nodded again, recalling what his world looked like. Each word from his interlocutor added new, increasingly distinct details to the picture. Can you imagine what would have happened in the event of their success? The question caught the man off guard. He strained his memory even harder, and anxious images rose before his eyes. The ancient colossus flinches and slowly lowers its long arms. The platforms of the districts break off and collapse. Elegant towers, viaducts, and small houses shatter, crashing into the untouched earth or trees far below. Hundreds, if not thousands, of innocents perish. Then the giant shifts its feet, shaking off the little that still remains on its rounded torso, and steps inexorably toward the city in the neighboring valley. "And that's in the best-case scenario," the man in black snorted. "Some of the engines might be faulty, or break down later." The patient ground his teeth in pain. Taking another step, the colossus stumbles. Its right knee cannot straighten all the way, and the tiny figures in the control cabin yank the levers to no avail. They manage to order the robot to spread its arms in an attempt to keep its balance, but it lacks speed, and 200,000 tons of metal clumsily collapse from a height of 1 kilometer. Ardania could not evacuate, and a second city, 4 times larger, is added to the first one wiped off the face of the earth. Only a handful of residents from the distant districts were not crushed and managed to escape the fire and poisoning by toxic fuel fumes. But enemy troops are already entering the ruins. Fortunately, the attack was repelled. 3 terrorists were killed in the shootout, and the rest were quickly subdued and placed under arrest.
"Thank the gods,"
the man whispered in relief. But even before his interlocutor opened his mouth again, a new flash illuminated his mind. "I am glad you admit your guilt." The directorate agent looked at him with naked hatred in his eyes. "It is very important that you realize exactly what you are being punished for and, if possible, be racked with guilt. Welcome to the Oubliette, scum. Pull me out." With these words, he stood up, snorted, and vanished. Just a second ago, He had towered over the patient like an angular shadow with a pale face. And the next, he was gone. The prisoner stood up a little and anxiously scanned the room, but noticed nothing even remotely resembling an exit.
What the hell is going on here? Am I dreaming?
The captive shouted, feeling his partially returned memory crashing down on him. Our conversation is not over yet. The agent's voice rang out right inside his head, and the far wall slid open, revealing a huge screen. With horror and disgust, the man saw himself on it. A heavy, muscular man in hospital pajamas lay with his eyes closed on an identical bed, strapped down and tangled in tubes. The lower part of his face was hidden behind a breathing mask. Numerous multicolored wires ran to his clean-shaven skull, and a pair of the thickest cables vanished into empty eye sockets, carefully cleared of blood. At their other end was a small metal box with hundreds of lights, switches, a dozen keyboards, and a wide monitor. 2 doctors and an engineer were bustling nearby, and the man in black stood right in front of the box, studying the rows of buttons. "Have you figured out where you are yet?" He spoke in an unpleasant, gloating, and hypocritically polite voice.
I'm sleeping. It's just a nightmare.
The prisoner muttered detachedly, awkwardly climbing down onto the cold floor. "Oh no, it's much more interesting than that. You are locked in a virtual reality. Your real body is completely paralyzed, and its brain is connected to a state-of-the-art computer isolated from all networks. This wonderful machine models the environment with incredible detail and makes you feel whatever we want. Be whatever we command. Such is your punishment approved by the Supreme Court." The man turned away and stubbornly pursed his lips. A sharp sense of guilt for the hypothetical victims of his plans squeezed his heart like a clawed paw, but it paled in comparison to the realization of just how deep a hole he was in. However, the captive had no intention of giving up, and the man in black realized it. "Unfortunately, a lot of material was wasted on calibration," he said in a sing-song voice, gesturing widely around the room. "But your accomplices served the good cause of science. The first 3, alas, died during the connection stage. The others died shortly after or went mad while serving their time. One, a little blonde, I think, somehow managed to commit suicide. But don't worry, we have taken all necessary measures. Even if you suddenly wake up, which of course is impossible, your body will never move again. But the life support system won't let it die of old age or organ failure. And there is certainly nothing to catch in a sealed, sterile chamber."
I'll get out. I swear to God, do you hear me? I'll get out, whatever it takes.
The prisoner hurled the stool at the screen, but it wasn't even scratched. Control from within your prison is, by definition, impossible. Trust me, we've taken care of everything. We even dialed down your intelligence and memory, just in case you're a hacker. We don't need that kind of risk. And do you know the essence of any punishment? It is needed so that others wouldn't dare repeat their own or someone else's mistakes. Now I will speed up the simulation time and wait until you despair properly. We will record a video and run it on all channels. It's unlikely anyone will want to share your sad fate. But first, let's touch up the scenery a bit." The fingers of the man in black danced across the keyboard, shifted a few levers, and the hospital room vanished. Losing his footing, the prisoner collapsed onto the floor like a sack. However, it could hardly be called a floor now. An absolutely flat, glowingly white surface, devoid of temperature and texture, invisibly transitioned into identical walls. Almost immediately, the air filled with a barely perceptible, sickly sweet stench, and his mouth, with a caustic, sour bitterness. The captive awkwardly got up and took a step toward where the screen had been, but instantly doubled over with a groan. His stomach felt as if it had exploded from within. Yet a second later, the pain passed, leaving only sensations of hunger and nausea. "My apologies, I overdid it a bit." The torturer's disembodied, insinuating, mocking voice rang out again. "All of your sensations were engineered by our best psychologists. Even my words are aimed at stripping you of hope and breaking any urge to resist. You will suffer, but your tortures will by no means become unbearable. If you lose your mind too, and cannot fully experience what is happening, would that really be a sufficiently graphic spectacle for others?" With a cry, the man threw himself against the featureless white wall. It was like trying to strike the air, but instinct proved stronger than his will. Apparently, he thought, they had turned him into a brute animal, also to prevent him from ruining their damn video with some kind of manifesto. "Go on, show me everything you've got," the jailer snorted. "See you in 3 months, and then perhaps we'll execute you or give you a better cell. Outside of this program, you have nothing left anyway, and never will." And by the silence that followed, the prisoner realized that he was now completely alone in this absolutely empty, quiet, abominable place. He spent the first few hours pacing mindlessly around the cramped bubble and making fruitless attempts to break through its invisible walls. His virtual body knew no fatigue. He had no need to breathe, though his reflexes were still functioning. His knuckles, battered to a bloody pulp, healed almost instantly, and the prisoner quickly learned to ignore this pain, fiercely throwing himself against the faintly shimmering whiteness. It was all in vain, and he knew it, but his rebellious spirit could not accept it without a fight. A torrent of curses poured from his throat, interrupted only by rare bouts of nausea. The man threatened a terrible fate upon the agent in the strict black suit, the directorate, the engineers, the medical staff, the families and friends, every god he could remember, and his own physical body, which was unable to gouge out their eyes and tear their throats. But he was the only one who could hear himself. Finally, reason somehow gained the upper hand over emotion, and the prisoner, leaning heavily against the wall, slowly slid to the floor. The only thing in this monstrous prison cell was himself. Only now did he find the strength to pull away from his grim thoughts and examine his body. The hospital pajamas were old, dirty, and already torn in several places, but no traces of fresh blood could be found on them. Out of curiosity, the man smashed his knuckles against the floor again and wiped them on his pant leg. The scarlet stains vanished along with the wound, and attempts to tear a shred of cloth from his clothes or take them off failed completely, as if they had become a part of his body. His system screamed with hunger and sickness, though clearly nothing threatened him here. The virtual skin did not sweat, the flesh was still full of strength, and his mind, though severely downgraded, remained mockingly clear and sharp. The prisoner closed his eyes and dug into his memory. The details were blurred, but overall he remembered everything from the moment he woke up. The computer would not let him forget, dispassionately playing the same scenes over and over. Remorse for a genocide he had never committed also burned his soul, though the man vaguely guessed that it should have faded by now. Any more complex thought now seemed like a problem in advanced algebra, and the captive blankly repeated it until the individual words completely lost their meaning. He even tried to reason aloud, but by the end of a sentence, he would stop understanding its beginning. But worse still was that he had just enough mental capacity left to fully realize the deficiency of his current brain. After a few hours, the idleness became unbearable, and with angry cries, he threw himself against the impenetrable void once more. He thoroughly inspected every centimeter of his cramped cell, constantly losing his bearings in this featureless place and starting all over again. Everywhere there was only a uniformly smooth, barely tangible, shining whiteness. No irregularities or hiding places were found in the floor either, and the ceiling was now too high to reach by jumping. There was nothing here but trembling light and stale air. After his fruitless pacing, the prisoner would sit by the wall or lie on the floor again, trying to pull himself together and think of something. Anything. He muttered under his breath, shouted the most terrible curses that came to mind, sang songs, howled in different voices, just to find something to do. The lull would give way to another bout of aimless running, then despondency would set in again, and so on in a loop, without the possibility of falling asleep or quietly losing his mind. On the 5th day, the captive lost track of time and simply began to listlessly await the next communication session with his jailers. Soon, trying to distract himself from other irritants or simply out of sheer boredom, he chose a different entertainment. The man could spend hours beating his head against the walls, cracking his skull, pulling out his hair one strand at a time or in clumps, breaking his fingers, biting through the veins on his sinewy arms, gouging out his teeth and eyes. However, his reflexes worked perfectly, and the more than realistic pain often cut short his boldest experiments. He did not notice the long-awaited screen appear on the wall behind his back, and so he flinched in alarm upon hearing the slightly mocking voice. "Well, how are we holding up?" The directorate agent examined the prisoner with interest. The man was curled up on the floor, listlessly chewing on his left palm. He had hardly changed since their previous conversation. The hospital pajamas were a little more wrinkled than before. The man himself also looked perfectly healthy, except for the paleness brought on by the unremitting hunger and nausea. His thick black hair and beard stuck out in unkempt tufts in all directions. His posture spoke louder than words of the degree of his despair from such a helpless, half-living existence. The prisoner was fully conscious, his memory intact, and he was acutely aware of how pathetic he looked right now. He turned slowly, and without releasing his hand from his bloodied mouth, fixed a strange gaze upon the agent. In his eyes burned a mixture of anger, melancholy, joy, and God knows what else. "I hope you haven't forgotten how to speak," the torturer inquired solicitously, his eyes scouting the monitors that were invisible from this angle.
Just shut up and kill me.
The captive said in a dead voice.
And then yourself. No, better your buddies first, and then yourself.
"How rude of you." The man in black shook his head. "And yet we cut your 3-month confinement short by nearly 2 days.
Great, shove them down your throat, and deliver me from all this already. This is inhuman."
So, killing guards who are honestly doing their job and destroying entire cities is human, in your opinion? The agent snorted.
Prove it happened first.
The prisoner snarled, walking with a staggering gait toward the screen.
You could have just planted this crap in my head.
Perhaps we should dial down your intelligence some more. You're thinking a bit too cleverly. The jailer adjusted something on the console, and the prisoner felt it.
You took my body, but you won't take my soul.
His heavy fist slammed squarely into the screen, smearing blood across the hated, pale face. "Suit yourself." The agent shrugged indifferently and leaned toward the camera. "You know, while you were rummaging around in there for 3 months, only 10 minutes passed on the outside. Not much of a term, but we managed to hold a meeting and alter our plans slightly. Since you held up so well, your punishment will last for an indefinitely long time. The Oubliette will also be sped up a bit, to about 1,000 years per minute of real time. The doctors say your meat brain can handle such loads, and they are curious to see what comes out of it in the end." The man could not have encompassed such a span of time with his imagination, even if he still possessed his former sharp mind. But that was not required. The very realization of eternity among featureless walls crashed down on him like an unliftable, almost tangible weight. The prisoner dropped to his knees, clutching his hair, trying to utter a single word. His throat seized in a convulsive spasm, and acrid tears welled up in his eyes. Meanwhile, the agent casually flipped through clips of the patient's captivity in the virtual prison, talking about what would happen to him next as if it were a matter of course. "And while you are exploring the new scenery, we will edit a clip of the first part. There's enough material here for a good propaganda piece, so now we only need you as a subject in a side study. I think we'll just leave you alone for a week or two and attend to more important matters. Nothing will happen to your body or the Oubliette here. The automation will take excellent care of everything on its own."
You wouldn't dare.
The convict barked hoarsely, but the directorate agent merely shrugged, typing another set of commands into the computer. "Oh, I certainly dare," he replied. "The Supreme Court approved everything, but you have my sympathy. I wouldn't wish such a fate on my worst enemy, though I just did." Flicking a toggle switch, the interlocutor disconnected, and the prisoner stood silently for a few seconds before the spot where the screen had just been, staring into a single distant point, bewildered and hollowed out. And suddenly he recoiled, nearly falling. The walls of the prison cell blinked briefly, turning from snow white to a fiery red, flickering very unpleasantly. The man squeezed his eyes shut, pressed his palms to his face, and buried his face in his knees. Yet the bright crimson light easily penetrated all such barriers. The foul, sickly, sweet, burning stenches intensified, filling his nose and mouth, and nausea surged from within once more. Coughing violently, the captive curled onto the floor in a fetal position, and instantly jumped up, feeling a sharp itch all over his body. He began to scratch fiercely, tearing the frail fabric and his skin, which had broken out in tiny blisters. But no matter how painful his wounds were, they dissolved in a second, and it all began anew. Torn off nails, shreds of flesh, and scraps of clothing flew to the blood-red floor, vanishing without a trace, so that soon nothing remained of the dirty pajamas. Suddenly a voice spoke. "This is how you will spend the near eternity," the agent said calmly. "Your clothes have been removed to save resources, and other redundant molecules will be turned off soon as well. And so that you don't get as bored as last time, I'll put on some good music. Well, enjoy." The prisoner wanted to shout something after him, but couldn't. He gasped for air like a fish, but the oxygen was rapidly depleting. A minute later, the atmospheric leak stopped. Just enough of it remained for the man to keep reflexively trying to inhale, yet unable to do so. However, the stench was going nowhere, and a cheerful melody, looped mid-chord at the end of the second minute, continued to blare from all sides. The following weeks blurred from his memory. No, the prisoner remembered everything, but the events of that period were too chaotic to form an accurate picture. He rolled on the floor, tearing off his skin and flesh, choking on a silent howl, rushed along the crimson walls for hours, convulsively squeezing his throat with his hands, crushing his eyes. Anything just to rid himself of the torture program's influence, or to drown them out with other, less monotonous agonies. But the prison cell relentlessly and dispassionately did its job. The surfaces, blazing with a temperatureless fire, burned his retinas around the clock. The music, initially even pleasant, soon became unbearably tedious, and the man mechanically tried to shout incoherent sounds, attempting to sing along with it. His lungs tried to inhale the void, but were filled only with stench. Every hour the captive would bite off his tongue and claw at his palate, both saturated with bitterness, only for them to grow back a second later. Before his mind's eye, scenes of uncommitted catastrophes constantly unfolded. This was at least some form of entertainment, even despite the strong sense of guilt. The images were the same, perhaps with minor variations, but the prisoner was not intelligent enough to recognize them. Once it occurred to him that he could use them to study the outside world, or even remember his irrevocably stolen life. A few months later, the captive became thoroughly convinced that this was not the case. His memory yielded only general abstract descriptions of objects and events, while his imagination filled in the details. In terms of sensation, it resembled a bad, distressing, looped waking dream. He often tried to kill himself. At first, the attempts were haphazard and bound to fail. The injuries from days of stubborn headbutting against the walls healed instantly, and it was impossible to get a proper running start in the cramped cell. Snapping his own neck was easy, but as a reward, instead of the desired death, he received only a brief paralysis. When it happened for the first time, the man was terrified. Spending eternity immobilized, even while detached from the itching blisters, would be immeasurably worse. However, his sense of touch returned in a minute, and soon his muscles came alive as well. Lacerations with lodged tooth fragments obediently healed over, and the spilled blood instantly returned to his strong veins. His body did not change. Even the workouts with which the prisoner occasionally entertained himself were useless. Over time, he grew more resourceful and daring, as far as his suppressed intellect allowed. The man clawed at his flesh with his fingernails, trying to reach his internal organs, to tear out his heart, to rupture his stomach filled with acid, to turn his insides into lifeless mincemeat. A few times his hand got stuck inside his closing abdomen, causing agonizing pain and forcing the prisoner to exert superhuman efforts to free himself. After that, he abandoned such experiments. Reaching his brain with his thick fingers through the eye socket or ear was entirely impossible. Initially, he had to rest after each attempt until the pain was somewhat forgotten, but by the end of the year, he could already endure it. Through a month of constant practice, the man figured out how to break his legs in a way that resulted in a convenient open fracture. 2 years later, he trained himself to extract the sharp shards of bone from the wound with a single precise movement. Another 10 years were spent using these blades to slash every part of his organism. However, the best result he managed to achieve was strange hallucinations from a splinter driven into his skull, though even then his thinking remained crystal clear. Then the bone would obediently vanish from his hands, reappearing where it belonged. Every new day, month, century was just like the last. Among the featureless walls, the prisoner lost his sense of time, and it was possible to distinguish past periods only by which ideas consumed his thoughts. In an absolutely empty bubble, even the most powerful intellect could hardly find many different occupations. And over an infinite span of time, even the widest variety would sooner or later merge into a uniform, tedious blur. But given nothing but endless time and a resilient mind, even an idiot would eventually come up with a multitude of brilliant things. Man, as everyone knows, can get used to anything. The years flew by imperceptibly, like minutes. After a few decades, the prisoner stopped paying attention to the bitterness and the stench. His fingers still mechanically scratched and tore at his sick skin, but the tactile sensations now bypassed his consciousness. The music merged into a uniform noise and became just another unnoticeable part of the background. By the end of the century, the sorrowful thoughts of fallen cities and the flickering of the blindingly red walls completely ceased to trouble him. Even the convulsive respiratory reflex no longer caused him discomfort. The captive of the computer prison watched the changes in his perception with interest, and the periods of indifferent calm between bouts of impotent rage or all-consuming misery grew longer with each passing week. He began to meditate, initially trying to drown out the torture, and later also because he was tired of pacing the cell aimlessly. The prisoner could sit, lie, or stand for many days without moving on legs that knew no fatigue. For the first 6 centuries, he detachedly examined his hands and the rest of his body, noting previously unnoticed details. By the end of the 10th, he had learned the exact location of every hair, pore, and itchy spot. After another 300 years, he no longer cared what to look at, himself or the monotonous walls. Thus, he spent several millennia, occasionally giving birth to one spontaneous thought or another. However, many of his reflections ran into a lack of intellect, and feeling highly inadequate, he would take up something simpler. From staring at the uniform walls and ceiling for so long, amorphous hallucinations had long since begun to appear to the prisoner. His brain was trying to fill the void. Contemplating them was also interesting in its own way. When 17 minutes had passed on the outside, and the 20th millennium arrived inside the virtual trap, the man stumbled upon a useful idea. He realized that the Oubliette preserved his consciousness and sanity, but did not interfere too much with the evolution of his mind. This meant that, given enough time, one could completely reshape their entire way of thinking, formally remaining mentally healthy, yet acquiring new, unconventional talents. The principle was incredibly simple, but infinitely promising, and had the prisoner possessed a more powerful mind, he would have thought of it much sooner. On the other hand, he now had more experience in understanding exactly how the brain works. He took his first steps cautiously and by trial and error. At first, the man practiced on the spots flitting before his eyes, learning to keep them in his field of vision longer, to define their shape more clearly, and to recognize their shade. After only 28 years, he could already control them more or less freely. This entertained him, and he spent the next 3.5 millennia trying to construct meaningful, colorful pictures in this manner. But subduing the hallucinations also grew tiresome over time, and the prisoner moved further. He noticed that the visual figures triggered different, sometimes slightly unusual responses in his head. Experimenting with them, the man made a new discovery. It was the key to the subconscious. His memory supplied the words: synesthesia, neurolinguistics, hypnosis. The prisoner did not know their meaning, but he didn't give a damn. In the free, real world, humanity had advanced from stone tools to pocket computers in just 10 centuries. A mere 60 years passed between the first plywood airplanes and landing on a neighboring planet. And this was despite devastating wars, long periods of stagnation, and a cautious contribution to science. And although the captive of the Oubliette remembered nothing of history, he had more than enough time to invent anything from scratch, simply by cycling through combinations. Certain thoughts redirected the signals in his brain in such a way that he became slightly smarter. Sometimes it turned out the other way around, but the man, living countless lifetimes in his mind, doggedly pressed on. 2 millennia later, he made another leap just as sudden. On the mere scraps of intellect he had been left with, the prisoner learned to run far more complex programs. He would solve part of a problem, memorize the result, then restructure his mind, modeling a new small piece of a powerful brain, transfer the previous answer there, and so on until the victorious end. This allowed him to develop orders of magnitude faster and better. Of course, such labor took months and years, but years were precisely what the captive had in abundance, and even an imperfect memory could not stop him. Sooner or later, he would find the right answer. The jailers could hardly have foreseen that such a thing was even possible. The former man, the nameless terrorist, no longer existed. He had dissolved in the endless reshuffling of ideas and cognitive processes, and a new personality was born in his place. And the reborn consciousness thought more and more often about how to break the loop of such a pseudo-life. Night fell on the outside, but the prisoner would not have known it even if there were windows in the room and his eyes had been spared. But he did not care. For nearly 500,000 years, he had been working on the most complex and important task of his life, inventing a completely new type of programming. The captive had long since noticed that when he thought in a certain way, the virtual world began to behave slightly differently. The flickering frequency of the walls changed. New notes appeared in the foul stench. The melody stumbled for a barely perceptible fraction of a second. Intrigued, he began to look for patterns in such glitches, repeating the same actions hundreds of times, noting the subtlest nuances, perfecting the technique, and coming up with new approaches to it. What began as a shot in the dark and the familiar trial and error soon became a true science. Listening to the program's responses, the man mapped out the computer hardware, a diagram of the mutual arrangement of the elements responsible for one thing or another. He realized that everything was connected to the random transmission of certain signals between the parts, and so, without the slightest notion of such technology, he gradually figured out the general operating principle of the Oubliette, preparing to go even further. He even managed to devise a physics of his own, very limited, yes, but quite sufficient for a start. By redirecting thoughts from one part of the computer to another, he gained power over his illusory prison. At first, the automation stubbornly restored the Oubliette to its original form, but over 200 centuries, the prisoner managed to amplify the radio waves he generated, felt out the necessary circuits, investigated them, and slowly, by his standards, tweaked the settings. First of all, he restored his full intellect, and for decades he stood dumbfounded by such incredible power. For thousands of centuries, the prisoner had been solving problems, incredible even for the old masters, on a scrap of a mind that a mouse could compete with. Now, his capabilities increased by many orders of magnitude all at once. The work began to boil in earnest. He completely changed the environment in the cell, turned off redundant irritants, made himself a table for keeping logs, and a heap of other useful items. To an outside observer, this place would have seemed nightmarish, repulsive, and grotesque. So little did it resemble the creation of a normal human being. But the superhuman had his own ideas of comfort and convenience. In his virtual laboratory, he accomplished in a month what used to take many centuries. The hardest part was the memory. It was far from limitless, and new memories were already being overwritten on top of the old ones. However, everything necessary was regularly repeated and was therefore easily accessible. The most interesting part turned out to be the program that had once served for eternal remorse. Those images provided some idea of the real world. Of course, they could just as easily have nothing in harmony with reality or contain errors. But as it turned out, they actually did, saving a couple of millennia of additional verifications. He discovered that the Oubliette was shielded. The computer casing prevented electromagnetic waves from escaping outside. Having built several million physical and software models, the prisoner realized that the effects he observed were possible in only one case: if the barrier absorbed the outgoing signals but, in doing so, began to oscillate a fraction harder. Half an hour passed on the outside, and a portion of the Faraday cage disintegrated, entering into subatomic resonance with a series of finely tuned waves. A wave of new, unfamiliar radiations flooded the superhuman's mind, disrupting the already familiar algorithms, and for the next few hours, he patiently sorted through them, refining his understanding of the real world. Then he went back to generating radio waves. They were his only senses, but a frighteningly effective mind needed even these scattered and semi-random fragments. By 8 in the morning, he located other digital devices near him. By 8:30, he managed to connect to them. And when the clock struck 10, he already had 12 new apparatuses at his disposal. Each new acquisition accelerated his intellect even further, but the central hub of the system was still his native Oubliette, the fastest computing machine in the entire room. The mind was becoming a body unto itself, subjugating mechanisms and evolving by the second. By noon, he finally broke out into Golem City's internetwork, which connected many hundreds of computers. The time had come for a new phase of the work. A man in a strict black suit walked through the corridors of the directorate quickly, almost skipping. He was even paler than usual, and a vague anxiety could be read in his eyes. A raspy breath escaped from his lungs, which had long since grown unaccustomed to running. In his gut, the agent understood that if these suspicions were correct, hurrying anywhere was already useless anyway. But his legs carried him deeper into the head of the giant ancient robot of their own accord. For a very long time now, almost nothing interesting had happened in Golem City. With the end of the Great War, the world, desiring tranquility, had fallen into a new Middle Ages, becoming more conservative and cautious. Cities stopped communicating with one another, and states crumbled. The Earth had been resting and healing its wounds for more than a century. However, over the last 24 hours, too many unusual events had occurred in a row. Yesterday morning, a band of terrorists attacked the directorate, wanting variety in life, no matter the cost. The authorities were in no hurry to comment on this, and rumors crept through the city, each one more horrifying than the last. In the evening, the mayor finally spoke on the central channels, colorfully describing the situation and accompanying it with a video clip from the Oubliette, the new progressive prison. Meanwhile, the police found and destroyed several more radical groups, and the jailers were preparing to perform the same operation on the prisoners in earnest. But in the morning, an unexpected attack was launched on the city from out of nowhere. An unknown virus resistant to all types of protection penetrated every computer, even those that were completely cut off from the intranet, shielded, or turned off altogether. Apart from strange synchronous glitches in their operation, it also displayed the same message on the screens, the meaning of which was simple, but remained a total mystery even to the best specialists.
Hello, world. I am back. Do not try to interfere with me and everything will be fine.
The first events were certainly interconnected and, all in all, quite predictable. The last one stood out sharply from the rest, yet the man in the black suit feared that it might also turn out to be a link in a single chain. And he even guessed exactly how, though he was afraid to say it out loud. He was already approaching the hospital room when he felt the world around him change in a strange way. It was as if the air had become thicker, or some powerful radiation was permeating every cell of his body. The agent noticed that the correct door looked as if it had been welded shut around its entire perimeter, and right then, an image flashed in his head. A vortex of tiny sparks formed, flared up, and unfolded like a flower into a meaningful phrase. The man stopped dead in his tracks as if he had run into a wall. It was that very same voice.
Not a step further, or I will have to stop you by force.
Who is this? Trying not to move, shifting only his eyes, the agent located the sphere of a video camera under the ceiling and stared intently into it. Yesterday's patient, new concepts instantly flashed in his consciousness.
You don't need to introduce yourself. I know more about you than you do. You lost even before you decided to doom me to eternal torment. Given the chance, I would have quickly gone mad and ceased to suffer, ruining your plans. But I was left with a clear understanding of the situation and had eons to learn how to apply it. Do you think turning me into a simpleton could stop me? There are no barriers that cannot be breached if you have eternity and know how to think. They only slowed my work slightly, but even so, you wouldn't have had time to do anything. I turned an unbreakable prison into the source of my power, learned from scratch how to manipulate energy fields, and now, as you can see, I can hack even the human brain. In a way, I am even grateful.
What do you want? The man turned cold, imagining what such a being could do to him, but the superhuman's voice was indifferent.
I am not interested in your petty squabbles like revenge. I outgrew it 1,000,000 years ago. Right now, I am only interested in new knowledge.
The man in the black suit finally managed to overcome his fear and lunged toward the room's door, drawing a plasma pistol. But the moment he took a step, his legs went completely numb, buckled, and he collapsed onto the cold floor like a sack. The computers hidden in the walls hummed louder, piercing the space with shafts of microwaves. And what a second ago had been a strong, determined agent could now only drool, staring at a single point. The same fate befell 5 more overly zealous Directorate employees. However, the digital overmind allowed their mindless husks to be removed from the corridor. He had no intention of wasting computing power on nonsense. The citizens quickly understood what was what. A true god had stepped out of the machine, invisible, omniscient, and absolutely dispassionate. He was pointedly uninterested in the life of Golem City, merely gathering statistics, though he influenced it quite noticeably.
It is enough that it can be used as an antenna, and there are communication satellites left in orbit. I have already connected with the rest of the cities.
Many were dissatisfied because they were too accustomed to relying on computing systems or were simply afraid. At first, they tried to protest, smash devices, and incite their neighbors to rebel, but the overmind easily suppressed their impulses. Reading the signals in their heads, he anticipated every maneuver and pinpointed neurons, disrupting thoughts, uploading new ideas, and, in the most complex situations, causing temporary paralysis or frying their consciousness. At his disposal were myriads of cameras, microphones, observatories, and other technology. Soon, the demonstrations against the change of power in the city ceased, and indeed, the computer god honestly ignored those who did not distract him. Each hour of real time brought him more and more bizarre discoveries. By evening, he had gathered enough data to officially declare that the physical universe is also digital in nature and obeys certain equations, but far more complex ones than ordinary computers. And the next day, the experiments began. 8 districts from the furthest platforms were cordoned off, and the Overmind relocated their residents to the old, long-empty barracks inside the robot's body. A few people still dared to venture there and met no resistance, except for warnings that it was extremely dangerous. Those who returned spoke in hushed whispers of revolving kaleidoscopes of space, of numbers gone mad, when one object was simultaneously 2, 0, -10, or some completely alien quantity altogether, and of many other phenomena that could not be expressed in familiar words. Some possessed material evidence as well, such as fingers on a hand that no one could count correctly, or deformed faces. Then the god said that he had reached the limit of understanding mathematics, and to move further, living minds were required. He penetrated the subconscious of every citizen, joining them to his network. His presence, however, was noticed only by the strange thoughts that occasionally flashed, branching lines of equations, hazy epiphanies about God knows what, and dreams where this appeared more vividly. By 6 o'clock the following day, many began to experience strange moods, speak in unfamiliar languages, and suddenly see a barely fathomable underlying meaning behind simple things. The Overmind announced that he now understood how to translate absolutely all types of information into numbers, down to the most abstract. For him, mathematics and philosophy became one, giving birth to entirely new scientific fields. The mighty consciousness, stretched across the entire planet, gazed with interest at the true, previously invisible definitions of things, hidden deep within the mathematical foundation of reality. It understood where to look and thought about how to use this to the greatest benefit. Over such a short span, no one could notice truly serious changes, but a week later, the digital god managed to intervene even in those formulas that determine the most general properties of nature. The citizens did not understand how, but now everything around looked more correct, more harmonious, better. The world was becoming what it seemed it should have been from the very beginning. The new god seemed to be finishing the work of the old single creator, which had been abandoned halfway and was full of errors. And this was happening not only in Golem City, although it was impossible to contact other cities. At night, pillars of ephemeral, multicolored fire erupted from beyond the horizon, weaving into spiral vortexes and otherworldly words. Time did not pass as it used to, and at times there were several suns in the sky at once. And in some places, the very logic of situations changed. Finally, it all stopped, leaving no unnatural traces behind. But the machines were still working, and new, non-human ideas were being born in the brightened minds. A strange tension hung in the air, as if something far more important was about to happen very soon. The citizens of Golem City, obeying electronic signals, gathered in the main square. A week had passed since the day the Directorate was attacked. For 6 full days, the sole surviving raider from that time had been engaged in self-development without leaving his virtual prison. By his own standards, this titanic labor had lasted exactly 1 billion years. Those gathered spoke in hushed tones, turning their eyes toward the heavy doors. The superhuman left his room, stepped out to the crowd, and ascended a low stage. At the sight of him, the gathering fell silent at once. Looming over them was no longer a man, even if he was a creature of flesh and blood. The entire appearance of the tall, powerful, heavily built man with jet black hair and a short, thick beard literally radiated mathematical perfection. In the proportions of his body, his posture, his features, and his facial expression, there was an almost ideal harmony. And though his eyes were covered by a thick blindfold, the citizens knew for certain he was looking straight at them, through them, to the very foundations of the world. Now he saw everything with his mind alone, without resorting to the aid of material sense organs. No one exchanged a word, but everyone was thinking the exact same thing. The God-man swept an attentive gaze over the crowd, as if assessing the quality of the work done, and finally spoke. His resonant voice sounded as if he had only just learned to speak and now proudly wished to show it to everyone, which in essence was exactly the case.
Hello, world. You already know my story, and I do not wish to repeat it. But that was only its first chapter, full of very unpleasant things that I would like to get rid of. The time has come to finish it, take a clean sheet, and set about the second. Here, I have done everything I could, investigated nature, and corrected it as much as possible. Now I will leave you, and set off on a journey through other realities.
He paused briefly. Numerous small symbols lit up on his blindfold and on the strips of cloth wrapped around his forearms.
I no longer need computers or other external modules. I have left virtual reality and reassembled this body, taking into account all my discoveries. My new brain surpasses everything on this planet in computing power, in potential. It will have to be developed for a long time. Right now, I can do far less than I could yesterday. Consider it a new game plus, a reset of progress for the sake of gaining bonuses.
The symbols flew off his clothes and swirled around him in rapidly shifting formulas, outlining a wide cylinder of space.
Maybe one day I will return, or maybe not. But one way or another, this world is yours again. I ask only one thing of you. Use it wisely. Let my story serve as your motivator and example. Mind is stronger than matter and eternity. Its possibilities are limitless. You only need to realize them and develop them. Learn that which is already embedded within you. Never give up, even when it seems there is no way out and the whole world is against you. If you have not turned against yourselves, you will always manage to find the answer or become the one who can. And now, farewell.
The equations combined, expanded and reduced. And then the final line remained, wrapping around him in a simple spiral. For a second, reality wavered, and the stage was abruptly empty. Only a light breeze swept over the crowd. In the next instant, the mysterious, invulnerable virus vanished from all computers, and the machines once again obeyed their creators. The fantastic developments of the God-man disappeared too, but they could be invented anew. The citizens themselves felt a certain hazy shroud lift from them, which had subtly suppressed their will, and at the same time something deeply necessary, supreme, and unearthly departed from within. A wave of quiet, thoughtful conversations rippled across the square. The citizens gradually dispersed, immersed in their thoughts. They had not yet decided what to do next, but they understood. It would be interesting. The next reality into which the linguist translocated did not impress him all that much on its own. He found himself in a dense, dry jungle full of strange beasts. One fanged creature leaped from a tree and tried to sink its teeth into his leg, but struck an invisible barrier, and screeching, flew off into the scaly bushes. The superhuman stood motionless, calculating something in his mind and listening to his internal sensations. The planet was too young and had not had time to give birth to its own intelligent life or harbor anyone else's. There was no speech here, no writing, no works of art, nothing with facets of meaning rich enough for him to study and develop his intellect. However, he had not come here for them. An unknown object, striking him with the complexity of its structure, hovered a meter away from his tense face. The linguist could not determine exactly what it was. It was thinking, alive in some sense, but lacked even a hint of physical embodiment. Simply a set of formulas built into the very essence of the universe, describing. Even so perfect a mind could not encompass such an idea as a whole. But when the traveler addressed this structure, familiar, understandable, and friendly words resounded in his head.
Safe travels, Seeker. You found us sooner than we tracked your labors after all. We are engaged in the same pursuit as you, and we could really use such an experienced colleague. With us, you will be able to obtain everything you strive for, and even much besides. And here is who we are.
Unexpected, grandiose visions flooded his mind. Yes, this was exactly what he had been moving toward. The linguist smiled and stepped boldly into the very center of the numerical vortex. A second later, he appeared in a new world where real adventures awaited him, but that is a completely different story.